It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this portion of the show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com. You can get yourself an autographed copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But also, too, if you check around the site, all kinds of wonderful services we can provide for you at emailrevealer.com. If you think your boyfriend's cheating on you or your husband's cheating on you, we have something called an online infidelity investigation. You give us their email address, and we could trace it back to online dating websites, personal ads, even porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, and we could trace it back there. We could catch them cheating online. Also, all kinds of different investigations, adoption investigations, asset searches, locates, employment locates. So you want to collect on child support, you need to find your spouse's current place of employment. We could do that for you. Criminal records checks. Any kind of email tracing, you need a name and address from an email address. You would need to locate a runaway. You got their email address. You can email them, see where they are when they're opening the email. Computer forensics, cell phone forensics, all kinds of fun stuff at emailrevealer.com. Okay. I think we got a good one for you today. We'll be covering Ted Bundy, and we've done it several times in the past. But this time, what do we got? We got Dr. Al Carlisle. And he's written this fascinating book here. He's actually interviewed Ted Bundy way back in 1976. The first book is called Violent Minds. Violent Mind, the 1976 Psychological Assessment of Ted Bundy. And then he's written 4 books in total. But the next one coming up that he wrote about Ted Bundy is I'm Not Guilty. The Case of Ted Bundy, I'm Not Guilty. And then several other books as well. And he's got to be writing a book about Columbine, so we're going to have him back about that. Now, you can catch Dr. Carlisle at his website, violentmind.com or alcarlisle.com. And also, too, he's got tonight, as you're listening to our show, he'll be speaking at the Comic-Con in Utah over there this Friday night, Friday 22nd, September 22nd, at Comic-Con up there in Utah. And he's going to be speaking about... well, he'll tell us about it. Dr. Carlisle, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you so much. So tell us about yourself. Who is Dr. Al Carlisle?
Okay. I came from Utah. You know, my ancestry goes way back. And I was going to be a nuclear physicist. And I took a college class in advanced calculus and flunked it. So I thought, well, I can't do that. I really don't like math that much. And so I took a psychology class, and I liked it, and then got my master's and started working on my doctorate. And one day, a professor tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, would you be interested in the job at the Utah State Prison? And I thought, well, I've never really talked to a criminal before, but yeah, I'd love it. So I applied, got the job, and over those years, we had so many. It's just like a huge laboratory where you go in, and the guys are open. You know, before they go in the prison, they're not. But once they get there and they feel like they have nothing to lose, and you get so many guys who really want to understand themselves. And so I got to know all of these guys, you know, so many killers who would get into great detail. And my whole thing was, again, this is just a big laboratory. My whole thing was, what did you experience? What were you going through? What was your personality like? What were you thinking? What were you feeling prior to the crime? And what were you going through during the crime? And then after the crime, what did you go through? How did this change you? And with some serial killers, Keith Jasperson, I saw it from the Northwest and got his story, but, it's a question of, once you've killed the first person, why do you do it again? What is the drive? And Arthur Gary Bishop, who had killed 5 kids, after the first one, he said, he says it's, and he pointed at his chest, and he said, it's like something leaves you. And then after that, he went on and killed 4 more, and he didn't have any negative feelings. But the fascinating thing that was part of the beginning of this whole research thing, when he got convicted of killing the kids and he came to prison, he was on death row, and he said, okay, he wants to die. He's ready to go. And I went down and visited him. And it was just a routine visit. Okay, Art, you're here. I'm from the psychology department. Is there anything that you want? If there is, just let me know. And he said, yes. He said, I have killed 5 kids. I'm guilty of every one. He says, I want to know why I did it. I want to know how I got to that place in the first place, because I can't understand it. He came from a normal home. He was an Eagle Scout. He graduated high school. He went to college. He went on an LDS mission for his church, and so he's really religious at one point, and then when he found he couldn't stop with the kids, he gave it all up. But just the fact of that, then there was a Dr. Art Norman, who was doing a psychological assessment on Ted Bundy for one of Bundy's lawyers in Florida, and Dr. Norman, in talking about him and about when he started going to college, and he got hurt, and Norman was asking him, okay, what happened? And Ted says, I don't know what happened. He says, I don't understand it. And then he went on a little bit in this way, and I've seen so many people who have got to the point where they have done something really atrocious like that, and then in a very sincere way afterwards, they say, I don't understand how I got that way. Now, that can be taken 2 ways. A person can either say, well, this guy's faking. Of course he understands. How would a person not understand about how they got that way? Or you could say, well, let's assume he really doesn't understand, and let's go on that premise. And if we follow that one and explore that in every part of his life, starting from a child and take it step by step through his whole life, is there something we can gain by him wanting to understand? Can he teach us something that we don't know? And so that's kind of the way I've gone, and I've really enjoyed that. So, yeah, I worked at the prison. I still writing. It's Columbine now, the next one. Oh, may I correct you on one thing?
Sure.
The book, I'm Not Guilty, was the first one.
Okay.
And the one right now is Violent Mind, the 1976 psychological assessment of Ted Bundy. And that's the one that just got printed, I think, today.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Well, then, great. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Again, yeah. About Dr. Carlisle working in the prison, because you mentioned how the serial killer, he said something left him when he started committing these murders. Now, when you went to go work in that environment, how old were you when to work in that environment?
Oh, let's see. It was about around 30.
About 30 years old. Now,
About 30 years old.
now that's a pretty gritty, discouraging, depressing. People's lives wasted and lost. You see people who threw their whole life away. That people can't function in society. People are just predators. Being coming across that day after day after day, having to go into that kind of setting every day. Did you lose anything in your inside of you?
Well, that's a good question. Sort of yes and no. It was always exciting. In fact, I retired in '89, and I'm still having dreams about working in the prison, about doing evaluations and such. So that was an extremely exciting part of my life. However, on the other side of the coin, when Arthur Garrett Bishop was executed for the murder of those kids, I was with him on death row. And we talked. I would spend an hour talking, then his religious leader would come in, spend an hour, then I'd spend an hour or so. And I had seen our Archbishop several times a month, and every month for 2 years prior to that. So, I really knew this guy quite well. But we're sitting there talking, and it's getting close to midnight, and I know at midnight they're going to take him down into the death chamber and inject him with these chemicals. It's going to kill him. And he's ready. He says, I have no problem about it. He says, I did it. He says, I don't mind meeting God, but I'm afraid of meeting those kids on the other side. Anyway, the point, when it was over, here I am with this guy, and I'm there until they come in and take him and lay him on the gurney, and strap him down and take him down the death chamber where they do their thing. And I had a chance to be there and watch it, and I told Lord I really didn't want to. I wanted to remember him the way he was when he was alive. But when it was over, he had given me his last bit he wanted to say, his last words. And so I went out through, and there's 11 different connections, security places to get out of the grounds of the prison, went across the street where all of the TV and the reporters and everyone was over there waiting. And so I went in, and they asked me questions, what were his last minutes like when I was with him, and his mood, and was he scared, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And I answered all of those. And then when he finished, and this is the point, when he finished, I climbed my car. I drove 30 minutes to my house. I got in bed, went right to sleep, and then got up the next morning and went to work and had a pretty typical day, And so a person might say, how can you spend the evening with a guy who's going to die in a few minutes, in an hour or a few hours, and you're with him right up until the time they take him away, and yet you can go home and go right to sleep, And so, yes, that part of the question and answer is you get so used to all of that that it gets so it doesn't really, at least to me, it got so it really didn't bother me. Now,
you mentioned that Arthur was LDS, right?
Yeah.
You're also...
Archbishop was LDS.
Yeah, you're also LDS?
Yes.
And Bundy for a time, too. He was involved in the LDS church, correct?
Yeah. Which is interesting. Because that's another big question in Bundy's life. Because he gradually was falling apart, and he couldn't stop doing what he was doing. And, when he came to Salt Lake and he was getting away from Lake Sammamish, and the reports of this Ted with this Volkswagen, and when he came down, the killing started in Salt Lake. And he just couldn't stop. And then he got interested. The LDS missionaries approached him up University of Utah, and he got involved a little bit with their LDS ward, and then he stopped. And then just about a week or two before he was picked up on the Carroll de Ranch one, he told the missionaries he wanted to get baptized. And he got baptized. And I asked him, and this is one of the chapters in this Violent Mind book, this one that just came out. I asked him, Ted, why? Because he had told me that he was not religious. Now, he grew up in a religious home, and his parents were religious, his mother and stepfather. But he wasn't. He really didn't believe in God. And when we talked about what do you think's going to be in the next life, is there anything there when you pass on? He says, well, I think it's just going to be a big intellectual thing where you can discuss things with people and such. And so, in order for him to be baptized, one of the questions is, are you smoking? Are you drinking? You say no. He didn't say, no, I'm killing people, but that's all. It's not a big deal. But so he seemed very sincere. So the issue is, was he sincere? Did he really join hoping that he could stop killing? Or did he join just in case he got caught, and he would say, well, I'm a Mormon, therefore you people can be nicer to me because I'm one of you. He was never really one of them. But I felt that there was a sincerity in him. And a lot of other people did, too. People up north.
Okay. So now, you came into contact with Ted after he was convicted of the attempted kidnapping of that girl in the mall, the one where she ran away with the handcuffs still on, right? So he was convicted of that, and then how did you come into contact with him?
How did what?
When he was convicted of that and he was sent to the prison, how did you come into contact with him? What was your role?
I was a psychologist on there's a 90-day evaluation program in the prison. And the way it worked, if a judge found a certain defendant guilty of the crime, but the judge hadn't made up his mind whether or not he should send the guy to prison or put him on probation, he could send him to prison then for a 90-day evaluation. And in 90 days, he would be seen by a psychiatrist, by a psychologist, who was me, by caseworkers, and then in a meeting we would get together and decide some things, how we thought about him. But then I would turn my report into the court. And so that's how I became involved. I was a psychologist on the unit. And when I met him, he was walking down the hall towards me, and I was standing outside his little office I was using, and he stretched out his hand in a very friendly way, a nice smile on his face, and said, I'm Ted Bundy. You must be Dr. Carlisle. And I really didn't know a whole lot about him at that point. And then I read the pre-sentence, some other things. But the fascinating thing was he had a psychological assessment before he came. I think his lawyers had done it. And the psychologist had said, I really can't tell if he is violent or not because he is private. He's not telling me very much. So I don't have the evidence to say he's violent. The psychiatrist at the prison, Dr. Van Osten, who saw him, said the same thing in his report. I really don't know. I sort of suspect there's something going on there because he's not telling me. He's not revealing himself. And Dr. Austin said, since he's not revealing himself, I can't say that he is safe to go back in the community. And I doubt if he's going to cooperate in a therapeutic program because he's not being open. And so that's basically what I had when I started. You know, Ted's gone through this process before, so what am I going to do that's going to be different from what others have done? And am I going to be able to come up with anything other than just, Ted didn't really reveal himself. And so I went at it in a very different way. And so when I turned my report into court, I said, yeah, he's violent. And
well, let me ask you this.
It was fascinating to me because when we went to the sentencing, and I and another person, we were sitting over where the jury usually sits, and they had all of these people there. And, his parents were there, his girlfriend was there, reporters were there, Dick Larson and his wife from the paper, Seattle Times was there. So a lot of people were there, and Ted over on the other side with his lawyers. And he held my report up. The judge wouldn't allow him to question us on the stand. But he's before he pronounced sentence, he allowed Ted to say whatever he wanted to say. And Ted stood up, and angry, tears coming down his cheeks. He held up my report and he waved it in the air. And he says, this is not accurate. This was written to conform to the crime, and this is not me, and, all of that. And I was thinking, wow, he really hates me. But, then when he got sentenced to prison, what did he do? He contacted me. And we would meet there at the prison, and it's like he was my friend.
Really?
He talked, and I said, Ted, what are you doing? How do you spend your day, and so forth? And when he escaped, the first time in Colorado, and he got exhausted, he came down and he climbed this car. He was driving through it. He got caught. He got put back in jail. He called me. And we talked for about 15 minutes, and I recorded this. But it's like he was my best friend. And you think, wait a minute, how could he hate me so much when he's being sentenced? And then when he gets in there and after, we're friends. And he was a fantastic actor in this way. But yeah, it was really something.
When you were interviewing him,
like that.
When you were interviewing him about the attempted kidnapping, did he ever admit his guilt in that case?
No, not to me. See, with me and through his time in Colorado and through most of his time in Florida, he was adamant about the fact that he had not done anything, any of this. It was just about the day before when he met with, what's the name, an investigator from up in Washington.
Chipple or something like that.
And, I'll think of it in a minute. But Yeah, he met with him, and he confessed all these crimes.
So then, when you were interviewing him,
and
back to 76, when you were interviewing, now this was, or he had already committed some murders before this botched kidnapping.
Committed several of them up in Washington.
Yeah.
And finally, the two at Lake Sammamish, and then he left and killed one on the way down to Salt Lake, I think around the border of Colorado, Idaho and Utah, and then came down in Salt Lake and started committing homicides in Utah and in Colorado.
Now, by that time, he had already been involved in local politics, right? He was working for some local politician, correct?
Well, he was up in Seattle.
Right. Did he mention any of that to you?
Yeah. As we went through his life, he mentioned those, and he did a good job. He did a good job in political activities. People liked him. In fact, when he was arrested on the suspicion of attempted kidnapping of Carol DeRange, when he was arrested, and Jerry Thompson was a detective, a wonderful guy, extremely good at what he did, very down to earth, very earthy, so to speak, in the way he talked. Jerry, what you saw is what you got. There's no pretense. But boy, he dogged this guy Bundy until he finally got all the evidence. But when he was arrested, then he was going to go to trial and all that. There were people up in the Northwest who said, this guy cannot be guilty. I mean, Utah has the wrong guy.
Right.
He could not have done this stuff. And even when the sentencing, when Dick Larson and his wife, Virginia, were there in the court, and Dick Larson was a reporter who was collecting all this information and wrote the first book on Ted Bundy that they made into this documentary, But I talked, and Dick passed away, but I talked to his wife, Virginia, and she talked about being there, and she knew the cameras were scanning all the people out there in the audience. So she says, but she had tears in her eyes when the judge sentenced Bundy to prison, because she so strongly believed that he could not have done it. That's a fascinating thing.
Well, let me ask you a question.
About Ted Bundy.
How did he describe to you, when you were interviewing him, how did he describe his political activities? Like he was a driver and a volunteer? Did he trying to say, well, I have a lot of political influence with these people, that kind of thing? Or what did he say to you?
Well, he didn't so much brag. Ted didn't. When we went through his history, started a child and then teenage and his whole history,
right.
He didn't really brag, but, Art Fletcher in his campaign, and he was a driver, and he helped him with some of the speeches, and, but Ted he really enjoyed those political activities, and he was very good in them. And I believe that if Ted had not been a killer, if he had just been the political person that he wanted to be, that there's a chance you would have seen him running for mayor and governor of the state and like that. Very personable.
Yeah, if he was a politician, he probably would have killed more people, right? Let me ask you a question, though. Now, but did he seem to have any political influence? Like, did he get any kind of special treatment while there in the prison that you noticed?
Oh, no.
No. Okay.
He didn't have that. There were two things I saw in the prison, well, three things. One, it was when he started working back in the heart of the prison, and it looks like he was trying to make a false identification.
Really?
As if he was going to try to escape, and the officer caught him and sent him down the maximum facility. So that was one thing. But there were inmates, and this is before he was sentenced to prison, while he was in the 90-day program. Inmates told me about seeing him, and at times he seemed to be talking to himself. At times he looked very upset, and he would pace back and forth. And at other times he's very pleasant. And sometimes he'd be at the barred window at the end of the corridor and just talking to himself. But the thing that, the other side of this, now, Ted had already learned a little bit about legal things. And so their inmates would ask Ted to help them, give them some advice about their legal briefs, what they were trying to do in the court. And the officers liked him, but he didn't get any preferential treatment. You know, of course, he was only there for about 90 days.
Okay. And he was already trying to make fake ID. How was he? What kind of tools did he have to do that? It was just like a marker and a piece of paper. What was he doing?
Yeah, there was. It was down in the area where they would make signs.
Okay.
Down where they do license plates and another part of it. But he seemed to be gathering and working on something as if he was trying to make a card or something. You know, I don't remember the details on that, but the officer saw him and watched him and could see that, yeah, he was doing something like that, and so
okay,
he got busted and got taken down to max.
All right, this is a good time to take a commercial break. Okay, we're with Dr. Al Carlisle. That was great, Dr. Ted Carlisle, Ted Bundy.
Yeah, I'll accept that.
Dr. Al Carlisle, not Ted Carlisle. Dr. Al Carlisle. And the book we're talking about today is Violent Mind, the 1976 Psychological Assessment of Ted Bundy. And you can find more of Dr. Carlisle on his website, alcarlisle.com, and also violentmind.com. We'll be right back after these messages. By the way, I forgot to tell you, Doctor, the commercial break, you won't be able to hear it, and we won't be able to talk during the break, but it'll be 5 minutes long. So we'll be right back with more of Dr. And now a word from our sponsors. Archival Revival, the Christian Film Archive, is currently paying for vintage Christian films. They are dedicated to preserving and restoring classic Christian films and media. So if you have an original prints, negatives, or other film elements of classic Christian films, or you have audio recording masters for classic Christian record albums, they want to buy them from you. So email archival.revival@gmail.com, and they're going to make you an offer. Archival Revival wants to preserve these classic Christian films so that they continue saving people for years. These films have brought people to salvation. They want to continue that. Their staff has decades of experience in handling and preserving of film elements, and they utilize the very best climate-controlled film storage facilities around the world. Contact them today at archival.revival@gmail.com. If there's someone you know has these prints, negatives, recording masters, or other materials from vintage Christian films, you can check out their blog at archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Now, just so you understand, Archival Revival wants to pay you for these films. So you can look in your church attic, in the church basement. If you have a friend who runs a Christian youth ministry or these youth vacation Bible study camps, they have these old films in those big metal containers, 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter. Archival Revival wants to buy them from you. So this is a sponsor that actually wants to give you money. And all you have to do is contact them, tell them what you have. If you're in the UK or Ireland or Africa, these films are all over the world, and they're gathering dust, and they're going to deteriorate if they don't get into the hands of Archival Revival. So that's archival.revival@gmail.com. or the blog spot is archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Don't forget, this show is brought to you by pscoco.com. Phoebe Sod is an independent curator with the Cocoa Exchange. The Cocoa Exchange is formerly known as Dove Chocolate Discoveries, and they make the finest silky smooth chocolate because the products start with the best cocoa beans, which are tested for quality and flavor by expert technicians. The Cocoa Exchange offers not just premium chocolates, but anything from sauces and spices to brownie and cake mixes, and even coffee and martini mixes. If you wish to treat yourself or someone you love to a sweet and tasty gift, then the Cocoa Exchange is the brand for you. So you go to pscoco.com, you click on the Shop Now button, you can see all their beautiful chocolates, you can order it right now tonight, it could be in your mailbox in a couple of days, or if you want to get into the chocolate business, you want to be a chocolatier just like Phoebe Sod, you can click the Contact Us button, and you can learn how to get your own website, go into the cocoa chocolate business, and sell chocolate and make a little bit of money there. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But you also do all the kind of different services for you. An online dating service investigation. It's called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, even gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites. If you think your ex-husband or something is addicted to prescription medication or involved in a extreme online pornography addiction, we can produce a report for you that you can use in court. Adoption investigations. If you want to locate your birth parents or your birth child you gave away for adoption, we can do adoption investigations for you. Asset searches for you. Locate bank accounts, hidden assets, hidden properties, hidden income, all different kinds of services in the asset search investigation. Email tracing. If you need to locate or identify somebody from just an email address, we can do an email trace investigation for you, and all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here today with Dr. Al Carlisle. He's written a couple of 4 books in total, but the one we're talking about today is Violent Mind, the 1976 psychological assessment of Ted Bundy. He's written a couple other Bundy books. One is called The Case of Ted Bundy, I'm Not Guilty, and then also a couple others about Broken Samurai and The Mind of the Devil. And you can check these out at Dr. Carlisle's website, violentmind.com. So, Dr. Carlisle, when we left off, we were talking about him trying to make this fake ID. Now, what do you make of his successful escapes, especially in Colorado, these successful escapes? One thing I noticed in one of the police interrogations, he mentions that there were a lot of people involved and he had help. Do you think he had help during those escapes?
No. I haven't seen any evidence of it. See, the first one, as he indicates, he's in the courtroom, and it's a beautiful day. He's on the second story. The judge takes a break. He walks out. People walk out. Even the officer who's with him goes out to have a cigarette. And Ted says he's standing there by himself, and windows open, and he thinks, what the heck? He's tired of being locked up. He jumps out, and as he said, he would start chugging. He went up into the hills, and he was up there for a period of a few days. and then he comes down and he gets caught. The second time, he lost a lot of weight, and he went up through an area above his cell and along the place up there, and then dropped down into the officer's place down there, and there's no one there, and he left. He went out, and then he went up in the northeast. But he had indicated when he called me after the first one, he indicated why he was why he wanted to escape. And so in essence, he was saying if he had the chance, he'd do it again. But what he was saying is, he said, he kept saying to me and to others that he had new evidence on the Carol DeRange case, and he thought his conviction could be overturned. And the Karen Campbell case in Colorado, that wasn't going very well for the state, so I don't think it ever would have been overturned, but he said even if he was found to be not guilty of the Carol DeRange case, he said it would be several years to go through all of the appeals, and finally, if he was found not guilty and turned loose, he said just the fact that he had all of this negative publicity against him, he said nobody would hire him. He wouldn't be able to be a lawyer or a politician. So his thought at that point was, by escaping the first time, had he made it, he would have gone down in South America and ceased to be Ted Bundy.
And how would he make it down to South America?
A new career, and just sort of divorcing himself from everyone up north, because he knew that the authorities would always be watching to catch him.
Okay, but now the second escape went through the roof, right?
I hadn't heard of any help.
Okay, well
that
then
he got with the escapes.
But he had a car when he got out. There was a car there. He was driving around in a car with a decent car. I think he had fake ID too, and some cash on him. Where'd all that come from?
Well, yeah, he stole a car. Well, first of all, on the first escape, he ran up on foot.
Right.
Hurt his knee, actually. And then when he came down, he stole a car. And it seemed like it was a Cadillac. And he was sort of weaving through the streets. And a cop sign pulled him over and got him. The second time, when he got down in Florida, and maybe when he was still up in the Northeast, when he got down in Florida, he got some a fake identification, driver's license and all of that, some credit cards. He stole those, and he stole a car. So, and my guess is he might have stolen the car when he was up in the Northeast as well, but he didn't say much about that Northeast stuff.
Okay.
No, but when he got down to Florida, that's when he got his other identification, credit cards, car, and all of that.
Let me ask you this now. When you were interviewing him in 1976, that was after he had been working that suicide hotline with Ann Rule. Now, did he discuss that with you at all?
Yes. Yeah. And that was before he graduated from college. He was working the hotline, and evidently he had talked someone out of suicide. But Ann Rule, who was a crime writer at that point, and Ted was there, and whether it's in the next room or just on another phone in the same room, she got to know him, and she thought, this guy is really wonderful. He's cool. And so when she wrote her book, well, in the beginning, as I understood it, and this may be more rumor than anything, but I had understood that she really believed he was not guilty. He could not have done these things. And so she remained friends, and it's as though she was trying to find evidence or anything that she could offer that would show that he was not guilty. And then when it turned out that he really was, then she wrote that little addendum in her book saying that he was a bifurcated personality, that there was the Ted Bundy she knew and the Ted Bundy who killed people and did necrophiliatic stuff, and she said she couldn't put the two side by side. And there's a lot of important stuff in here. That how do you get a person who can kill, who can be so involved in following people? He even told his girlfriend Liz he'd start following a girl on campus and he couldn't stop himself. And he compared it to her alcohol problem. So how do you get a person who can do all of these things, kill a person, put the body in a location, come back and visit the body a few times after that, and yet the more social part of the person is interchanging conversations, involved in his college stuff at University of Pacific Sound, and doing the political stuff, and everybody says, boy, this guy is wonderful, he's up and coming. How do you get those two parts in the same brain? Now, there was once I was doing a workshop, and I asked him, I says, do you believe that a person can have good and evil in the same brain, same mind? And, how many of you, yes, how many of you know? And the vast majority of them says, no, you can't. And yet, you see, with so many of these people, these serial killers, they can seem very friendly, very personable, and then go out and kill someone. And then come back and just be the other person. They're not a multiple personality.
Well, let me ask you this, though.
It's fascinating.
Did it set off any red flags for you that here's this guy who's he's involved in a serious kidnapping, he's got handcuffs and stuff like that. It's not like you're holding someone's wrist and it's a little tussle. This guy has a plan. You know what I mean? This guy's got a plan. Yeah. With the handcuffs, came prepared. Did it set off any red flags for you when he said, I was working at a suicide hotline and counseling people threatening suicide?
Yeah, I think there was a part of Ted that did not want to do what he was doing. And when he was with Ann Rule on that hotline, he really hadn't gotten heavily involved with killing yet. And so he graduated, and then and a big part of this, he had Marjorie. Marjorie was the girlfriend he had in college, and extremely, very seriously in love with her. And she called it off because he seemed so inadequate, and he totally fell apart. He went back to Philadelphia, and he came back and got involved in the campaign, but that didn't work because the guy didn't get in, and he went back again and came back, and the second time it seemed like when he killed the first two people on Labor Day in 69. Not Labor Day, but Memorial Day in 69. And so he then starts getting involved in this, and he's already had this thing with Ann Rule. Now he's graduated, and so he's not the hotline anymore.
But did Did it ever occur to you, though, that he was at the hotline because he enjoyed hearing people in distress and was hoping maybe that someone would pull a gun out and shoot themselves on the phone, and he would be able to achieve that gratification that way?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, if you get that type of person, that intent, that fantasy tends to leak through their conversation. And I think that Ann Rule would have picked that up. Others would have, because there'd be all of these jokes and things about, gee, I wish so-and-so would die and I could enjoy it, all of that. No. Ann Rule saw a person who seemed very sincere in what he was doing. When Ted joined the LDS Church, just before he got picked up on the Durant kidnapping, when he was picked up in West Valley, and they found those tools in his car. It looked like burglary tools. The people who talked to him and knew this Ted Bundy, who was coming to church and doing things with some of the other people in his LDS ward, they saw a person who was very personable and very sincere. So can he look that way and not be? Or is there, just like there's a person who can kill and a person who can look very personable, is there a person who can be sincere about wanting to change, and yet another part of the same person, the same mind, that is addicted to killing that he can't stop? And the only way I've been able to explain it, and if someone's listening, they have evidence on this, I'd love to hear. To me, it seems like there are neural pathways that develop relative to these two sides. And so in my book, I've talked about compartmentalizing. And you get an actor that goes on stage, and he can be on stage, he can feel a part, he lives the part, and he goes off on the beach, and he's not that part anymore. But you get a serial killer who lives the part, he's doing those things, and then when he is away from it, out on the beach, he can't let it go. He sees all of these women out there, and his mind is quickly going to how I would capture them, where I would take them, what I would do with the bodies. And all of that goes through the mind in a matter of just a few seconds. And then if a person sits there and stares at him and dwells on it, then it begins to build up into that urge to do so. But so it's fascinating how you can have these two separate neural pathways going on, and a person can shift from one to the other. Now, whereas with an actor, it's different.
Did Bundy have any of those typical early childhood traumas, like molestation, bedwetting, setting fires, animal abuse, that is common in serial killers?
No. What he did have, when he was illegitimate to start with, he was never told that. His mother, Louise, accepting invitation from family up in the Washington area, went up there. And, she changed his name. But got up there, then John Bundy comes in as his stepfather and had some more kids. And Ted's the oldest, but Ted was really never part of the family. And so he would fantasize. He would get into all of these scenarios, and at first, the first fantasies are just hero ones, or fantasies about doing well. And when he was in about 4th grade, he wanted to be at the top of the spelling group, and he wasn't. And he said, I felt humiliated. Well, you don't get many kids who actually feel humiliated because they're not at the top of the group, And he tried out some other things that didn't work. But, so in essence, he was friendly. He was not involved in fires. He was not, haven't seen any evidence about bedwetting. He was just a quiet, a very shy person. And I talked to a lady who lived almost across the street from him, in the same neighborhood. And Ted and her and others would come out at night, and they would be on someone's porch, and they were talking. And so I asked her, did you see any anger in Ted? And I asked various of them. They says no, they didn't see any anger. Not as a child, not as a teenager. It came after he started in college. I says, what was he like? And they said, well, he was just there. He didn't stand out in any way. He was just there. So he didn't speak up and say a lot. He was pretty passive. And then when two things occurred when he was in his early teens, and one of them was he found he was illegitimate, and he had never heard it. He didn't believe it. And when his cousin showed him the certificate, father unknown, and I asked him about that, because I had learned that from the pre-sentence investigation. He's not, that really didn't bother me. Yes, it was an issue. Because a couple of girlfriends I talked to, he says he just cried when he mentioned that he was illegitimate, and they didn't feel like there'd be a girl who'd ever want him because he was. And the other thing is on the paper route, that little girl disappears.
Right.
And I asked Ted, I said, this girl disappears. She is in your general area, a mile or two away, and you have a paper route that goes through that area. I says, when she disappeared and it came out in the papers, what were your thoughts? Now, Dick Larson, who wrote that first book on Ted, went up and talked to him a few times, and a wonderful guy. But Dick said that was one of the biggest events the town had ever experienced, that girl disappearing. They searched everywhere, they drugged the rivers, and then somebody said, look, they're laying a foundation over here at the time she disappeared. Is there a possibility that the person could have put her body there? And so Dick thought, yeah, there's a good chance that, but you take those two events and you take the fact that he's in school one day and he has a couple friends, and he's with this one friend, and another kid comes up and talks to the friend and say, hey, we're doing something, going to have a little party, we'll get together tonight, would you like to come? The friend says, yeah, I'd love to. And the guy turns around and walks off. Ted's standing there. There's not even a recognition that the guy even looked at him. You know what I mean?
Sure.
It's like he was there. He never dated. But when he was in his early teens, about around 12, 13 years old, I said to him, I said, now, Ted, did you start going with girls? Yeah. Did you kiss a girl? Well, yeah. Well, did you do any petting, sexual touching of girls? He says, well, yeah. I said, well, Ted, what happened? Because you stopped, and you did not go on a date until you were a senior in high school, and you went to a prom. You just didn't date through that period, and yet you started that. What happened? And when he was kind of caught off guard, he didn't have a good, complete answer. I saw this various times with Ted. And he said, well, gee, Al, I don't know what it could have been. And that was the end of that. and yet every morning around the table, people were talking about the disappearance of that girl. It was in all the papers. Kids were talking about it at school. And so Ted, on the disappearance of that girl, said he didn't know anything about it. He didn't pay any attention to it. He didn't know what happened. I said, "Oh, Ted, how could you not have known?" He said, "Well, I think I was just so involved in my studies, but he was a B student."
Well, later on, didn't he admit to he would be a peeping Tom and he would masturbate and looking in windows right around that same age?
Yes. He did that towards the end, just before his execution.
But he never admitted to the murder of that 12-year-old.
Yeah, he started when he was young.
Yeah, but he never admitted to the murder.
About 12. And evidently, he had a room in his house that looked down into the neighbor's room in the bathroom, I believe, and he would watch. And he would stay there for periods of time to see what he could see. Then he went out window peeking. So the whole issue was it pornography that caused the Ted Bundy, the killer? That was a piece of it, but a bigger piece was he was out looking in windows. He was getting into crime magazines, and that was a time when true crime magazines would have a picture of a semi-nude dead body of a woman on the front. And so he wanted all of that. And when he would crime things, he told this to Dr. Art Norman back in Florida. When he read a crime story, he was not satisfied to read a synopsis of it or what somebody said about it. He wanted to read the actual killer's statements. That's what really excited him. So the whole criminal thing was big. When he went back to New York, and one of the things he did, he checked and found out he really was illegitimate. When he went up to Vermont and he checked on his birth certificate, but then come down and the girl places in New York, he said that he would go to a medical section of a library in college and check out or try to see anything or make copies of what he could on autopsies of female dead bodies. So it wasn't just pornography, it was just really extending out to the whole criminal part. He said at one time to a lady in Florida, she said, what was there about this? What were you like? And he said he was a person of the night, and he could be talking to someone, and they could turn and say something to another person and turn around and he'd be gone. He was proud of the fact that he could just disappear very quickly at night. And he loved the fact that he was a night person.
Well, let me ask you this. At the end, he called in Dr. Dobson, and why do you think he would call in Dr. Dobson, who is an LDS? Why didn't he continue with LDS and stick around with LDS people, first of all?
Okay. Well, first of all, he didn't like LDS.
Okay.
When he was up in Seattle, his girlfriend, Liz, that he spent much of his time with for several years, she had come from Utah. And she was LDS. She was not active. But, Ted had no interest in religion at that point. So when he came down and became LDS, I think that to me there was two things. And one was he wanted to change. He said, when I asked him, why did you get baptized? Why do you even get involved in it? And he says, well, there's something there that I wanted, that I felt would be good for me, So if it had been the Catholics, I think he would have done the same thing. If I had been the Baptist, it's like he was in Salt Lake, and there were so many LDS around him, and they were very friendly to him. And he went out with girls in Salt Lake. Even though he supposedly was engaged to Liz up in Seattle, he went out on dates with girls in Salt Lake, and a lot of them were LDS girls. So I think that it's just he was hoping that maybe something could change. If you're doing that, sooner or later you're going to get caught. And
Right.
Here he is going to law school, and this habit's interfering with law school because he's missing so much of it, and they're going to drop him from the program. But around the end of the semester, he goes to the professor and says, I'm sorry I've missed so much. Can I make it up? And they say, if you make it up, you can stay in the program. He makes it up, and then he starts classes again in January. So I think he wanted to change. And then the other part of that is if he ever did get caught, then he could say, well, here I am LDS, and therefore,
Right. Well,
I'm really a good person. These people can vouch for me and such.
Well, then let me ask you this. Now, toward the end of, he's on death row. First, he makes contact with these born-again evangelist types, and then Dr. Dobson. Do you think he was sincere in that pursuit of his faith?
In a way, I heard that he, before this, when he was on death row, he was meeting with a couple of people, as you say, getting involved in some of this, and they thought he was sincere, that he wanted to believe in God, in a deity. And then when it came with Dr. Dobson, it seems to me that I think maybe there's a couple things going on. One was, it's like Arthur Bishop when he confessed to the killing of the kids. And Wes Dodd, when he confessed to killing of those 3 boys, it's almost like a person saying, if I confess these things, then it will seem like I want to change. I want to be different. So you get that part saying, I know people are going to hate me for doing those things. Maybe if I confess, they won't hate me so much. And then the other part, it seems that he was trying to put the responsibility on the pornography. And yeah, that was a big issue, and it was important. But it's almost like he was trying to say, this is to blame, and therefore, world, if you don't get involved in pornography, you're not going to turn out like me. And yet at the same time, he was saying, there's really nothing different about me than so many other people. We're just human beings, and this can happen to people. So, yeah, confessing would make it sound like he sincerely regretted what he did, and that he was trying to help people to understand why he did it so that they could maybe not do it.
But you don't think that was a sincere confession?
Well, I think he was accurate in what he said. The real confession came when the detective from the Northwest came down, and he went over these crimes and told him who the people were, who the victims were, and where their bodies were.
I believe in those interviews, the detective described that when Bundy would start to discuss his crimes in detail, he would kind of drift away, and he even described that his face would change and like a stigmata would appear on his cheek, like a white blemish would appear on his cheek. Are you familiar with that?
To a degree.
What do you make of that?
there were a couple times when I was doing my evaluation of Ted that he would stop and he would space out, and it's like he would look through me. And he was talking about his girlfriend, Liz, and she had gone out with another guy. And as he started talking, he would pause, and his appearance would change. You'd see the anger there, but it's as though he was remembering this. He was reliving it. And so... And I saw that with other serial killers. I've worked with Keith Jesperson and others, that when they're talking about the crime, part of them is back in the crime. I got a guy that I'm communicating with now in prison, and he came in on killing 2 people, 2 girls. And somebody would like to write him, and he says he's very open about that. He says, but I don't want them to ask me about the crime. And this is why. He says, I don't want to get into it. He says, if I start describing the crime, then it pulls me into it. You see?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that Ted could talk about the names of the victims, what he did, where he put the bodies. And we're talking, about around 35 or so of these women. And how does a person remember the details about each one? And it just seems like it is such a powerful experience that the memories, the emotions become embedded to some degree in the mind. And so later on, when a person thinks about it, it's like they're back there reliving it. And so, yeah, I can see how as he talked about these things, he would slip into the memory of the actual event.
Now you mentioned 35 murders. John Henry Brown, one of his former attorneys, came out with a book recently, and he claims that Bundy told him that there was 100 murders. What do you make of that?
Okay, no, I don't go for that. Dr. Ron Holmes, a good friend of mine in Louisville, and it just seems like, I might be wrong, it just seemed like he was the first one to say that Ted had mentioned killing in 3 figures, which would mean 100 or so. But no, with all that work the FBI has done and everything else, I believe that the mid-30s is probably accurate. And, it's like if he's going to confess to these, why is he not confessing to the whole 60 or more others?
Well, if there were other people involved.
If there are other people involved, but a serial killer generally does it alone.
Well, let me ask you this.
Now, you had the Hilton.
Yeah. Oh, no, okay, well, not to interrupt you, but because one of the victims, the head was missing. And when he was asked about the head, he first he started talking about, the best way to get rid of these things if you have a basement with a furnace. And then he says, I was associated with some very strange people and odd things. I was associated. You kept using the word several times. And then he landed on that he put the head in a fireplace. But to barbecue a head in a fireplace would take days to burn a head down to the crisp in a fireplace where all the bones actually burnt down. So what do you make of that?
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing. Now, because there was a documentary just recently out where Ted said that about the monster. Anyway, and he mentioned that. So you had what's his name, who would kill victims and cut their heads off and take their heads to his apartment. And you've had others who have done that. To me, the reason why they do a lot of that is a way for them to relive the event after. That's the reason for collecting souvenirs,
right?
Like pieces of clothing and things like that, so that when they're alone after, they can relive that. Wesley Dodd, who killed the 3 kids up in the Washington area, when he went babysitting once, before he ever started killing kids, and he molested the kid he was babysitting. And when he got home, he said he decided from now on he was going to write out everything he was going to do. He says, because you get there and you forget what you're going to do, and there's some things you wanted to do, but you forgot. And it's sort of like, if I'm going to do this, I want to have a way to remember all of it, so that when I relive it, I can live it to the degree I want to. In fact, Wesley Dodd kept a diary, a journal, about all of that, just so that he could keep reliving it again and again and again.
And the reliving, this was for the purpose of like masturbation, for sexual pleasure, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Because the event is so powerful to begin with, and so much emotion, and yet there's a fear that goes with it.
What about the fact
fear of being caught?
Right.
Go ahead.
No, the fact that Ted also too, some of his victims, they were wearing makeup that they didn't have. They had items of clothing that they didn't have. So he somehow, right? How was he pulling that off? If he was doing all this in his car, like he tells us, and pulling off to the side of the road, how was he doing all this, changing their clothes and putting makeup on them and stuff?
Okay, he would take the bodies somewhere.
Yeah, where?
And in Lake Sammamish, she took them. And I'm not sure just where it was. Was it to a little a cabin? But, so if you have the body with you for at least several hours, there's a lot of things you can do. Now, there was a lady when Ted was going through these evaluations with Dr. Art Norman back in Florida. A lady who was there on this one occasion asked him, what is there that is so powerful, is so meaningful, is so important about this with the body? And he indicated it's not the killing, it's the possession.
Right.
Now, you had what's his name over in London, who killed kids, got them in there, and they killed them. And he said it was the possessing them. Like if they're dead, you can possess them. You can possess their soul. They're with you. And in Satanism, and Ted didn't have anything to do with Satanism, but one of the beliefs there is if you sacrifice a victim, the spirit of the soul goes into you, the person doing it, and that person has possession of that soul. So, it's something sort of akin to that, a feeding of possessing them, if you're the person who actually kills them.
Right. And in his confessions, he describes something called an entity that he would that would overcome him. Do you believe it was like a demon possession kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a possession, but not an evil spirit, not a demon possession.
Okay.
It's like a person develops the habit, and then when he gets triggered, he feels that overwhelming urge. He's not a multiple personality, but he feels that strong urge to do it like he was telling Liz, following these girls around campus at night. He couldn't stop himself from doing it. But he would feel that coming on. And a psychiatrist from New York who came down and did an evaluation talked to him about, did you hear voices? He says, yeah, I did. And he was talking about a feeling of being possessed. And he would shout, I'll say after, no, leave me alone. Got to stop. And, And there's evidence, and on one occasion, I know he threw some of the stuff he collected out the window, and he was crying as he was driving off away from the victim and feeling bad about what he was doing, thinking he had to stop, but he just couldn't stop. So he talks about it as, now I think it's just he didn't know another word to use, so he uses entity. And he talks to different people about this entity. It's this thing. It's just this overwhelming presence inside of him that when it gets triggered, he has to do it. I knew a guy who he was developing in this, and he says, he said one time he got on a bus and he was all dirty from his work. And as he walked down the bus, and it was mostly filled, but there were some empty seats, and when he went to sit down, the person would look at him like, don't you dare sit down here, you're filthy. So he'd go clear the end of the bus and sit down. And he said that would trigger that feeling, that he just had to do something. And he said that feeling would not go away until he could strike out some way and harm someone. And he said that could last for days at times. But when you strike out and harm someone, he said it's like you were knocked off your pedestal. You were knocked off that high platform you were on, that phony image that you're okay. And so to re-establish who you are, you get revenge. And getting revenge allows you to feel a sense of control, a sense of power, a sense of freedom, and, interestingly enough, a sense of peace. Now you have struck back.
Did you find that a lot with the inmates that you treated over the years, that they needed to have revenge? I think when I was a young man, I was kind of a hot-tempered guy. I would I would have hit the guy on the bus. I wouldn't have gone and killed some woman. I would have hit the guy on the bus. I just would have hit him. When I was a young guy in my 20s. But the guys you find in prison, they have like an extra need for revenge. Because now I don't even consider it. I wouldn't even consider revenge today. I don't even consider it.
Yeah, their whole self-image is not good to start with.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons they got involved in all these criminal activities. I had one guy, for example, he was over in Hawaii, and he met this girl on a beach, and she was there with her family, and her family was up in their hotel, and he spent the whole day with her. And he had some money, and he bought her things, and he got her dinner and such, and then in the evening, he decided, okay, it's time to have sex after dark down on the beach by the ocean. And he would start to put the make on her, and she says, no, don't want this. And he suddenly felt this overwhelming feeling of getting even. That's that whole revenge thing. Getting even. And so he raped her. And he got caught. After all, she spent the whole day with him.
Right.
So, just that overwhelming impulse of you dirty, rotten, blankety, blankety, blank. You can't tell me that after I've spent all this money on you. I've done all these things. I've been so nice to you. And so, yeah. But,
well, this might be a good time to take a commercial break. Okay? We're with Dr. Al Carlisle, and the book we're discussing is Violent Mind, the 1976 Psychological Assessment of Ted Bundy. And you could find Dr. Carlisle's website at violentmind.com and also alcarlisle.com. We'll be back right after these messages with more of Dr. Al Carlisle. And now a word from our sponsors. Archival Revival, the Christian Film Archive, is currently paying for vintage Christian films. They are dedicated to preserving and restoring classic Christian films and media. So if you have an original prints, negatives, or other film elements of classic Christian films, or you have audio recording masters for classic Christian record albums, they want to buy them from you. So email archival.revival@gmail.com, and they're going to make you an offer. Archival Revival wants to preserve these classic Christian films so that they continue saving people for years. These films have brought people to salvation. They want to continue that. Their staff has decades of experience in handling and preserving of film elements, and they utilize the very best climate-controlled film storage facilities around the world. Contact them today at archival.revival@gmail.com. If there's someone you know has these prints, negatives, recording masters, or other materials from vintage Christian films, you can check out their blog at archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Now, just so you understand, Archival Revival wants to pay you for these films. So you can look in your church attic, in the church basement. If you have a friend who runs a Christian youth ministry or these youth vacation Bible study camps, they have these old films in those big metal containers, 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter. Archival Revival wants to buy them from you. So this is a sponsor that actually wants to give you money. And all you have to do is contact them, tell them what you have. If you're in the UK or Ireland or Africa, these films are all over the world, and they're gathering dust, and they're going to deteriorate if they don't get into the hands of Archival Revival. So that's archival.revival@gmail.com, or the blog spot is archivalrevival.blogspot.com. Don't forget, this show is brought to you by pscoco.com. Phoebe Sod is an independent curator with the Cocoa Exchange. The Cocoa Exchange is formerly known as Dove Chocolate Discoveries, and they make the finest silky smooth chocolate because the products start with the best cocoa beans, which are tested for quality and flavor by expert technicians. The Cocoa Exchange offers not just premium chocolates, but anything from sauces and spices to brownie and cake mixes, and even coffee and martini mixes. If you wish to treat yourself or someone you love to a sweet and tasty gift, then the Cocoa Exchange is the brand for you. So you go to pscoco.com, you click on the Shop Now button, you can see all their beautiful chocolates, you can order it right now tonight, it could be in your mailbox in a couple of days, or if you want to get into the chocolate business, you want to be a chocolatier just like Phoebe Sod, you can click the Contact Us button, and you can learn how to get your own website, go into the cocoa chocolate business, and sell chocolate and make a little bit of money there. Remember, all these shows on Awake are brought to you by emailrevealer.com. You can go to emailrevealer.com and get a copy of my book, How to Become a Successful Private Investigator. But you also do all the kind of different services for you. An online dating service investigation. It's called an online infidelity investigation. And that's where you give us your husband or your boyfriend, your girlfriend's email address, and we trace it back to their online dating websites, and we return a list of all the dating sites that email is registered to. We can expand on that investigation and trace it back to porn sites, escort service sites, swinger sites, even gambling websites, and even prescription drug websites. If you think your ex-husband or something is addicted to prescription medication or involved in a extreme online pornography addiction, we can produce a report for you that you can use in court. Adoption investigations. If you want to locate your birth parents or your birth child you gave away for adoption, we can do adoption investigations for you. Asset searches for you. Locate bank accounts, hidden assets, hidden properties, hidden income, all different kinds of services in the asset search investigation. Email tracing. If you need to locate or identify somebody from just an email address, we can do an email trace investigation for you. And all kinds of digital forensics, computer and cell phone digital forensics, where we can recover deleted content from an email or a hard drive and produce a report for you that you can use in court. That's emailrevealer.com, or you can contact me at oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. The show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. But don't forget, too, you can have your ad played here at the Opperman Report. Reach thousands of people on 3 nights a week. Reach me at oppermanreport@gmail.com if you want to have your ad played at very cheap rates, too. We're here today with Dr. Al Carlisle. The book is Violent Mind, the 1976 Psychological Assessment of Ted Bundy. And you can find his website at violentmind.com. I'll have a link to the Violent Mind book and all of his books, actually, on the Opperman Report bookstore, and also Facebook and on the blog as well. Dr. Carlisle, you had mentioned, it's in the description on Amazon, that Bundy sent you a letter later on, and you've never shown it to anybody. What can we find in that letter?
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't know about the letter until this last spring, but he wrote a letter, and this is in my book, both versions of it. But while he was in this program, and I was going through the psychological evaluation, I was gathering information, I was talking to him, I was spending all this time with him. He wrote me a letter, and he said, "How can you really understand me under these circumstances? Because I'm not the person you would have seen had it not been in prison or in jail under these circumstances." You know? And he wrote one and did about half of it, and then he rewrote it and completed the letter, and it was addressed to me at the 90-day evaluation unit. And his lawyer had these. They were never mailed to me. And so I don't know exactly why, but my guess is he really didn't write them for me. My take on it is he wrote it for the judge and for his lawyers. That is, if he was going to get up in court and say that my evaluation had no meaning, it was wrong, and I was totally up the creek, so to speak, it would have had some meaning. But if he had it there in the letter and could have given the letter to the judge and had the judge think about this, you know, maybe you can't evaluate a person under those conditions, that maybe it would have had a little bit more impact. So I never received the letters, but there's an outfit up in Salt Lake that's going to be doing a documentary on Ted Bundy, and they had copies of it. And so I was able to get a scanned copy, and so I put it in this book on the Violent Mind, the Psychological Assessment of Ted Bundy.
Now, in this book, Violent Mind, do you have the complete psychological assessment that you did back in 1976?
Pretty much. I have all the findings of it, and it consists of what the 90-day evaluation unit is, And then the psychology of the crime, that's looking at the crime and what you get out of the psychology of the person from the crime. And then there's some the reason for the assessment and the sense of completion. Then his history, childhood, teenage, things concerned about college. And then the real meat of it is in conversations I had. See, I got the information from Ted that I got, but I called people who knew him. I called girlfriends, and I got their information. And they told me, they said, hey, there's two parts to this guy. The guy isn't a clean one-owner like people think he is. There's a dark side to him. And I got that from different people. And then I put all of that together and was able to actually confirm Ted's violent personality from all of this. And I knew when it was occurring. And I knew when in the fall of 72, when his old girlfriend Marjorie came up, and they, Ted was engaged to her. At Christmas time of 72, just before all of the homicides started, he was engaged. More than anything, she sort of proposed to him.
So let me ask you a question.
He accepted.
So the girlfriends, the ex-girlfriends, they were suspicious of Ted, that he was up to something?
No, it's just Ted had Liz, his girlfriend, in Seattle that he was spending a lot of time with. He'd stay there nights, and he still had his apartment. He'd spend so much of his time there with her and her daughter. But the original girlfriend back in college who dropped him, and I call her Marjorie, others call her Stephanie, he kept in contact with her, and then he went down and visited her, and they got something going, and she came up and visited him, and it looked to her like there might be a possibility because she could see the side she wanted to see in Ted. She told me, she says he had turned 180 degrees. He had totally changed. He was now outgoing. He was confident. He had a good future ahead of him. And so she thought that maybe this can work out. So at Christmas time in 73, she went up. Liz had gone back to Utah to be with their parents for Christmas holidays. Ted had indicated he was going to stay up there and study for college, for his classes in law at the University of Puget Sound. And they really got it on well. And they did skiing and sex and just, and so.
Well, let me ask you this.
When she left.
Oh, good.
When she left to go back to California on New Year's Day in 74, they were engaged to be married. And, so, yeah, I asked Ted, why? What happened? And he had always wanted a wife who could be a politician's wife. And he said that Liz was not that. And he thought that Marjorie would be, but then that didn't work out, he said, because she would get too upset with him about things like him forgetting the tomatoes, locking his keys in the car, things like that. And so it was just a few days after she left to go back that he started killing victims, and he kept going throughout the spring of 74.
Let me ask you this now. How did you get in contact with these ex-girlfriends? Did he provide you with their contact information as references?
Well, the pre-sentence report had talked about these people, so I was able to get their phone numbers. Regarding Liz, I told Ted I wanted to contact her, and he says, let me give you her home phone. And so I got her home phone and called her. I talked to Ted's mother. I talked to some other people. I talked to girlfriends. I talked to several people. And so this is how I was able to come up with my conclusion that Ted was actually violent, because I could trace it. I could trace it starting with possibilities as a child that created difficulty for him, made him lonely, as a teenager, as at college with Marjorie and such. And I could trace it step by step and saying, the testimonies are telling me all of this, and you see a consistent pattern of the development of the violent mind. And then after the Christmas in 73, it's like everything fell apart. He had to drop out of college, and he told Liz, he says, I just can't study. I just can't keep my mind on everything. And, we know now that he was killing during those times. But so that's how I came up with my information. That's how I made the decision that Ted is violent. And here's my documentation.
Well, I have
all the way through.
One last question for you about Ted. How did he earn a living during this period of time when he's doing all this killing?
Well, he did lots of different jobs. He worked at Safeway. He worked at a yacht club. He delivered medical supplies, and finally he was employed by the Republican Party, in a pretty nice type of job. He did some research. But one thing about him, you look at his history of jobs, he never kept many, never kept them very long.
And
he was always jumping from one thing to another.
And the suicide hotline, that was volunteer. He wasn't getting paid for that, right?
Right.
Was he getting school credit for that?
Possibly, I'm not sure. He hadn't graduated, but he was a senior and was close to graduating when he was with Ann Rule on the hotline. And so I haven't heard how he got on there in the first place.
Okay.
But then after he graduated, he stayed there working for the Seattle Harborview Hospital, and he was doing some things with them before graduating, and so they kept him there, and he worked as a therapist for them.
That's fascinating. I tell you, it's amazing. Yeah. I always wonder how these guys earn a living, and keep themselves afloat while they're running around doing all these murders. I can barely keep up with what I'm doing now. Like, how do they do this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, the next book you got coming up is Columbine, right?
Oh, yeah. And this one I'm doing with a co-author. Her name is Rita Wallace, and she's a graduate student of Utah State University. But there's a few people who have become extremely interested in Columbine, that they have gathered about every piece of information you can get. Like Rita has gone over and just recently reread about 15,000 pages of information on Columbine. And so when I'd read some of these books on Columbine, and the explanation was, Eric Harris is a psychopath. And here's the characteristics of the psychopath, and thus it explains why he did what he did. And I'm thinking, no. It describes what he was like. It describes his personality at that point. But it doesn't talk about how he became that way. So the book we're doing is on something like the psychological analysis of Columbine, but it's looking at Eric Harris's childhood, Dylan Klebo's childhood, what it was like when they got together, how everything, the bullying, and a lot on the media. They were just so involved in all of this violent media, and they bonded together quite well. They believed in the same things. So it got to the point, and this is the big part of the whole book. It got to the point where, you have these two guys, they're seniors, they're going to graduate in a few weeks. And Dylan and his father went down and got enrolled in college and got a room to start the fall. Eric tried to join the Marines, and he was turned down because he was on an antidepressant medication. But so here you have the whole life ahead of these guys, and yet they're willing to give up everything, including their own lives, and die of suicide or die by cop inside Columbine High School, just for the possibility of killing up to 400 or so people. And they killed several, but their original plan was to put explosives in there, which they actually put in there in duffel bags, but the explosives didn't go off, or it would have shattered these pillars, and the whole library upstairs would have come down on top of the cafeteria, the dining room downstairs, and killed all these students when they were there eating, And so the issue is how? What is there about doing this and dying that is so compelling to a person? They're willing to give up their family, their lives, their futures, their possibilities of careers, and just to die after having done this. And so that's what we're explaining.
Well, did you find any information on their arrest? They were arrested for that burglary into a surveillance, like a van, and were allegedly abused by the police and stuff. Did you look into that?
Yeah. They did a couple things. One, they got into the computer system, and they were able to get this one person's locker open, and they got in trouble for that. But they got into some equipment in a van, and they got caught, and they had to get in this program, and they got in the program, and they both confessed, and they succeeded in the program, and they were saying, yeah, we're sorry for what we did, and we're really glad that we got caught, and the program is very good and has helped, really, really, really helped. And all the time, they were still considering the possibility of going through with this, and they were learning about weapons and about explosives and ammunition and all of that. And so, yeah.
And what about other friends and other students being involved in the plot that were never caught?
I didn't see any evidence that other students were involved in the plot. Now, they had some other friends, and but they weren't very close. They gradually pulled away from the friends. And Eric and Dylan pretty much did things together. They made basement tapes where they talked about how they hated everyone and they were going to kill people and all of that. And they wrote some things in journals and such. But interestingly enough, nobody knew. They had talked about killing, but it's like, okay, big deal. They're just talking about it. They're really not going to do it. But nobody really knew that these two kids were serious about going in and killing so many students or teachers or staff or whoever they saw. They were just going to go in and kill everybody they could kill. And an interesting part of all of this is that, the explosives were to go off on the inside of the school and bring down that floor above. And they were going to be out there and shoot students who came out.
Right.
Well, the explosive didn't go off. So they went in, and they went, to the cafeteria, and they went to, the other dining room at the library and such, and up and down the halls, and shot various people. But an interesting part, and there's really something very powerful about this. A person can fantasize doing this, and the fantasies always come out the way they want them to. And yet, when they got in there and they killed Rachel, this one girl, when you actually kill someone in person, it's so different from the fantasy of doing so that there's something overwhelming about that. Reality suddenly hits them. Now, they carry on doing some killing, and they pass up people, and then they get to the point where they commit suicide. And when they do, they've still got explosives on them. They've still got ammunition on them. There are still kids in the library and these other places. They could have killed a lot more people before they would have been killed by the police or before they killed themselves. It's almost like they got in there and reality started hitting them. On one part, this is fun. This is what we wanted to do. We're going to do this. We're going to kill all these people. But on the other hand, you see the reality of shooting someone with a shotgun. And it's so powerful. It's so horrible that reality seems to smash against the fantasy. And the fantasy can't carry through. It just can't keep going with the power it had in the beginning. So anyway, that's what that Columbine book's going to be about.
Excellent. Dr. Carlisle, we're out of time, but how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, they can email me. It's al.carlisle@me.com. And if they want to email me about questions they have, I'll answer the questions. If there's something they don't like about the books, I'm very open for them to say, hey, I didn't like this, or I didn't like this, or I did like this. Anything they want to ask about, I'm open to email, and they can just ask me, and I'll respond to it.
Yeah, it's true. You always get back to me real quick when I email you, so it seems like you're very accessible. Dr. Carlisle, thank you so much, okay?
Oh, thank you.
And let me know when the Columbine books come out. We'll have you back on the air.
Okay, I sure will. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Okay, they got Dr. Al Carlisle, and the book we discussed today is The Violent Mind, the 1976 Psychological Assessment of Ted Bundy. Very interesting guy. He actually did the psychological assessment on Ted Bundy. You know what I mean? Spent a lot of time, 90 days, interviewing Bundy. Forgot to ask him actually how many of those 90 days he actually spent with Bundy, but couldn't have been that many, because you got to consider, those guys are so overworked and all those prisons and stuff. And in this Columbine book, in my research for this show today, man, I tell you, I discovered some things that I never saw before about Bundy, and one thing especially is this missing head that he claims he burnt up in the fireplace. And he's talking about, in the same conversation, he's saying, well, if you knew people that had a furnace in their basement, that's the best way to get rid of it. You know what I mean? And he was talking about things and people he was associated with. So I don't know. I'm not at all budging from my theory that Bundy had some kind of help. The political connections, these escapes, and just it's way too hinky for me. And even too, one of the first murders too was at like a police softball game at a or a picnic or something like that in one of these parks. That the thing was full of cops. Who knows what's going on with Bundy and Columbine? I've done many shows on Columbine, some good, some not so good, and there's a lot of disinfo around Columbine. There's no doubt in my mind about that. I met one of the private investigators way back in around 2000 or 2001, might have been at a PI convention, who worked on the civil lawsuits with the Columbine case. And he was convinced right away. He says, "Oh yeah, there was way more kids involved," and this guy was up to his neck in this thing. And when you hear about these other kids, and he's talking about these basement tapes, and some of the kids on those tapes, their father were FBI agents that were in charge of the investigation. People was witnessing bombs being thrown off the roof when Dylan and Klebold were accounted for. The bombs that were brought in was hundreds of pounds of bombs. These two kids, what did they make, 6 trips to bring all these bombs in? So. My opinion on Columbine is there's something fishy with Columbine, and then it seems too that some of the characters around researching Columbine, I'm suspect of too. Okay, and I've gone into that in the past as well. If you enjoy the show, don't forget the members section, OppermanReport.com. You go to my members section. I really can use some members this next couple of weeks too, because I had some unexpected expenses this month. Jeez. Oh, boy, and we got the rent due coming up, and I'm low. So I'm going to have to do an overdraft or something. So if you need a membership, 13 months, I'll give it to you for $65 if you PayPal me directly so I get that cash automatically. Got a bunch of new stuff going up in the member section. I just got to get over to Sean. One interview with Dr. Ted Knoll. One is an interview with A.J. Weberman, which is is one of those golden A.J. Weberman interviews. I'm going to put it in the member section now. But it's going to make it to the air shortly because it's too powerful to be left in the member section. It's really good stuff. AJ's getting impatient with me. He's getting old and impatient with me. Last time we had the problem with the French fries. This time he's feeding his dog. I gotta go. I think he thinks I'm stupid. He doesn't have great questions. He probably reminds me when I was a kid. But anyway, there's that AJ Weberman interview. I'm going to be doing a report on the arrest and conviction, and then the on the run, the fugitive status of Sean David Morton and his wife. Sean David Morton used to be on the air right before me over at Revolution Radio, and then he was also a host one time on American Freedom Radio. A lot of people know him. He was on Art Bell. I got a hold of his sealed indictment on the original charges that he's just got convicted of. He just got the 72 months or 76 months in prison. His poor wife got 24 months. She had a great deal. She didn't have to go to do any time. But because of this jerk, she's sitting in prison right now tonight. I hate to see anybody in prison. But this Morton character, oh my God. I got a hold of the original indictment and all the stuff you hear him talking about on these interviews and stuff. He's talking about the charges and this tax problems and stuff like that. When you hear my report on this, I just got it last night. I read the whole thing. And because... And by the way, it's going to leak out, too, before I get a chance to do the report on it. I'm a little worried. But if you read this thing, there's a lot more blatant criminal activity in his arrest than he is even publicly known. Like, this guy was filing... In 2010, he filed bogus tax returns for 2009, 2008, 2007, 2006, 2000. No, it was 2009 he did this. For 2008, 2007, 2006, and 2005. So in 2009, he files a bunch of tax returns for previous years for millions of dollars and seeking millions of dollars in refunds. And he did multiple returns with different information in them that were sent to different IRS offices. He understood a flaw in the IRS computer system and took advantage of that flaw in order to file in multiple jurisdictions and different offices of the IRS with different information in order to get multiple tax returns. Then when he gets caught on this, he gets caught doing this, they pull the money back out of his account. I'll tell you the whole story. It's a whole big thing, but I love the story. This guy is such a crook, man. It's not even funny. And how anybody could be saying that what do you call it? That they took him down because he knew too much. He was exposing the truth. He's a whistleblower. When you hear this blatant, and he doesn't deny it. He doesn't say, "Oh, that's not what happened." It just says, "Well, you took the money out of the wrong account. That's not my account." And then he does it again in 2010 when they take the money the first time because they put a lien on his checking account and his wife's checking accounts. He owes him. He goes, "Hey, file another 10 tax returns for the same years and do it again, hoping that they'll get the checks." And then when they want their money back, he makes phony coupons and calls them bonds. It's a forgery. It's a non-negotiable instrument. It has no value. And he said, "Well, I just paid you off." It's great stuff. I gotta love it. Anyway, so we'll be back after this. You might